So we are effectively done talking about single cells for the sake of single cells. Okay? That doesn't mean we still won't talk about what cells do and things like that, but there's not much else to teach you in terms of cells. Okay? You have to review and go over the parts of the cell and what they do, and cell transport, diffusion, osmosis, active transport, that kind of stuff. You have to review that stuff and study it. Okay? But we're not doing much else other than the lab on single cells. So now we need to look at is we got to transition from single cells to multicellular organisms. Right? And our example of the multicellular organism in Science 10 is a plant. Okay? So you're not dissecting anything. That's either a disappointment or a huge relief, whichever applies to you. Okay? But we're not dissecting anything unless you consider cutting a plant a dissection. Because we'll cut them, and that'll be that. I should probably water them a little bit. These are the plants from last semester. I saved them, sort of, and I remember to water them. So, what we're going to look at today is kind of how multicellularity came about. We're going to talk a little bit about evolution, natural selection. We're also going to look at that whole, like, really controversial idea of, creationism versus evolutionary theory, okay, why they are not mortal enemies, okay, why they do not, in fact, contradict each other, okay, things like that. That's what we'll be looking at today. And we'll be looking at this topic right here, which is probably the most important thing when it comes to the difference between a single cell, a colony of cooperating cells and a true multicellular organism. Okay? And that word is specialization. Okay, well, let's start off with this. Does the Catholic Church think that evolution, the theory of evolution, is sacrilegious? Do they think it's bad? Do they think it contradicts creationism? The answer is no. It doesn't. Okay? People think that incorrectly. Lots of people will tell you that, oh, well, the Catholic Church is, way behind the times. They think that evolution is not a thing. They totally think evolution is a thing. Okay? And in fact, you guys are very lucky. Pope Francis, who's basically probably been the Pope you remember, okay, is actually a scientist. He has a degree in chemistry, believe it or not. Okay? So he is very much wanting to bridge the gap, the perceived gap. There really isn't one. It's just a perceived gap between religion and science. Okay? Certainly, are there some things the Catholic Church disagrees with? Yes, there are. Okay? But it's not evolution. Okay? It's more about the ethics of some of the things we do with science than it is science itself. Okay? Many of the greatest scientists were very devout people. Okay? So the Catholic Church stance on the theory of evolution is that it is the mechanism through which life is able to adapt and continue. Okay? So the way Pope Francis kind of put it, as I understand it, is this. God may have created everything. That's what we believe. But the idea that he did it literally in 6 days is not necessarily true. Okay? Lots of things in the Bible are meant to be taken figuratively, not literally. Okay? Now, there are two groups here. There are fundamentalists. Okay? Fundamentalists are people who believe in the literal truth of the Bible, that everything in the Bible happened exactly as it says in the Bible. Okay? If you are a fundamentalist, you will disagree with everything I say today. And that's okay. Everybody's got their right to believe what they believe. Okay? All I'm telling you is the Catholic Church's stance on this. The creation story is that, a story. Okay? The time the Bible was written, most people were illiterate. So they needed to have things explained to them in a fairly simple way that they could understand. For the Jewish people, especially at that time, a week was a sacred amount of time. There were 6 days where things were done, and then on the Sabbath day, which incidentally is Saturday, not Sunday, okay, is the day where you rest. It's the day where you enjoy the fruits of your labors, okay, and things like that. There's even that story in the Bible where Jesus cured someone on the Sabbath, and they were going to throw rocks at him until he was dead for doing so. Okay, and that's when he pointed out that it's okay to do God's work on the Sabbath. Okay, you're just not supposed to do your own work on the Sabbath. So a week was a sacred amount of time, and it was an amount of time that people of that time understood. If you'd have said to somebody in the time the Bible was written that, so 4.5 billion years ago, there was this cloud of cosmic dust that coalesced, and under incredible gravitational pressure, the hydrogen gas in that cloud began a process called nuclear fusion, where the hydrogen atoms are forced together to create helium, and it releases vast amounts of nuclear energy, including heat, which would bathe and light the planets that slowly formed from the process of accretion, where meteors were hitting each other and collecting into these masses, and then all this stuff. People would have looked at you and went, we need to throw rocks at that person until they're dead. Okay? Because you would have been considered a heretic. Okay? Which was like, look, you're crazy, and you can't be around anymore. That's not how things work. People wouldn't have understood that. They weren't educated. They had no concept of 4.5 billion years. They just tried to make sure that they had enough food on the table for the day. Right? So telling them the story that it happened in a week or in 6 days made sense to them. It doesn't mean that the order is wrong. The timeline is an exaggeration, let's say. Okay? It's a figurative language. Right? And so we're not meant to take it that way. The order in which the Bible describes it still fits with the order science says. Okay? Let there be light. Big bang, pretty bright. Have to think, big explosion created everything. Okay? Also, the first thing that would have been in our solar system would have been the sun. Okay? That whole process of accretion, nuclear fusion, whatever, that would have been the first thing. Okay? The planets formed after that. Okay? Separated the earth from the sky, the land from the sea. Okay? Filled the sea with creatures. Okay? On the 6th day, man, you were the last thing. Okay? You're the last thing to evolve. You're the most recent thing in the timeline. That's fine. Okay? It all fits. It all fits just fine. Science and creation say the same thing. Okay? So there's not this big disconnect that people think there is. Right? In terms of the idea that man evolved, that's also fine. Okay? The Catholic Church has no problem with that. The Catholic Church understands that when God set everything in motion, there was a plan, and that over time, his creation was going to change. If he wanted life to be able to persist, he had to give it the ability to adapt. Okay? That ability to adapt is what natural selection is. Okay? If something changes in the system, okay, those things that can't adapt go extinct. Those things that can adapt or are fit, okay, are selected for. And then they cause changes in the population, and over time the population changes, okay, and new things evolve. Okay? There's absolutely nothing wrong theologically, okay, with that idea. Right? Over time, the earth changed. Okay? Things happened, right? And life had to be able to adapt to keep going. Okay? So the church has no problem with the idea of natural selection, no problem with the idea of evolution either. Okay? It's how life continues on the planet. Okay? How the creation story continues. Yeah? Okay. So, multicellular organisms, or multicellularity itself, has actually evolved several times. Many of the groups that evolved are already extinct. Okay? But some of them have persisted. That would be the fungi, the animals, and the plants. Okay? Those are the 3 multicellular kingdoms, okay, of life. Protists are single-celled eukaryotic organisms, and then there's prokaryotes, okay, or the monorans, as the kingdom is called, okay, that contain bacteria and all of that kind of stuff. Okay? So, multicellular organisms obviously have many cells. So here's the history of Earth. diagrammatic. Right. So 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth forms, okay? I mean, it's been forming for a period of time before that, but we kind of consider this to be the final condition of the Earth. Okay? 4.6 billion years ago is about the time when Theia, which was another like protoplanet in our solar system, crashed into Earth. Okay? That impact liquefied all of the rock and cast a bunch of debris out into orbit around the Earth. That debris eventually coalesced and formed the moon. Okay, at this point, that's what we consider kind of the history of the Earth as it is now to start. Right? At that time, Earth would have been a molten ball of rock. Okay, completely sterile, right? But with a crust that was beginning to cool. As the crust cools, the gases around begin to condense and fall to the Earth. They form an atmosphere, they fall as rain, we start getting oceans forming, okay? So it takes between 600 million and a billion years or so for all of this to happen, okay? The first life originates as single-celled organisms, okay? And so we've got the atmosphere being mostly carbon dioxide, ammonia, like very, very different atmospheric composition. All the life would be in the ocean at this point, consuming the carbon dioxide using photosynthesis. All right. Now, this purple line here, bluish purple line, you see, okay? Here it's very, very thin because it represents the diversity of life on Earth. That is, how many different kinds of organisms there are. Okay? So it's very, very thin to begin with, and it stays pretty thin for quite some time. Okay? So another 500 to 800 million years, okay, and we start getting the photosynthesizing bacteria have been working for a very long time. And there's nothing preying on them, so they just do really well. And they grow and they grow and they produce lots and lots of oxygen. But at the same time, they're pulling huge amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. In fact, they're basically doing the opposite of what we're doing right now. So instead of the Earth getting warmer, the Earth got colder. A lot colder. And in fact, it's these organisms that caused the first mass extinction. Okay? They caused a critical tipping point in the composition of the Earth's atmosphere, where the amount of carbon dioxide and the amount of oxygen basically flip-flopped. Okay? And the atmosphere actually became toxic to much of the life on Earth. And it died. Okay? And only a few of the photosynthesizing organisms continued. And the Earth got really cold because the greenhouse effect was greatly lessened. Okay? About 2.8, so another, 400, 500 million years, oxygen's continuing to build, and we start getting large, more complex single-celled organisms, okay, and eukaryotic cells, okay, and we get the first multi-celled life. Not multicellular, just multi-celled. Now, you're probably going, what's the difference? Once it has more than one cell, it's multicellular. No, not really, okay? There's colonies of cells that are all identical, and then there's multicellular organisms that have cells that are different. Okay, so that's specialization, that's the mark of a true multicellular organism. Now, look at the width of the line here. Oop. What's happening to the width of that line? Started out like a pencil, okay? Now it's like a big jiffy marker, right? Once multicellularity came about, the diversity of life on Earth just started to take off, okay? So we get to about 1 billion years ago, okay, and we get like the first animals showing up, okay? Up to this point, there wasn't a lot of kind of animal life, right? You get the first multicellular, true multicellular organisms, and then this line just goes out like this, okay? And you get that first kind of the Cambrian explosion is what it's referred to. There's suddenly this massive increase in diversity. Okay, just the conditions are right. Okay, there's all these niches that need to be filled, and there's all these organisms that are appearing. Okay, and natural selection is going, sweet, we don't have to do anything because, well, there's all this opportunity out there, and well, basically everybody lives because there's so much of everything to go around. Okay, so during that time, there's this huge explosion of life. You get your trilobites and all those kind of things that we associate with being very, very old. Sponges, worms, okay, things like that. Right? So it kind of goes like that. Okay. Believe it or not, this thing right here is actually our ancestor. This is the first chordate. Okay? The first thing with a dorsal hollow nerve cord. Okay? Like what we have. Okay? About 1.5 inches long. That's the ancestor of all vertebrates. Okay? So been around for a while. All right, so that's what science says. It's also what the church says is true. Okay? This is the history of life on Earth. Okay? It took a long time. There were lots of stops and starts, mass extinctions along the way. Okay? That threw a monkey wrench into the system, but things adapt, things survive, things continue to procreate, okay, and survive. Okay, everybody all right with that idea? Okay. All right. Before I get into multicellularity, let's just take like a 5-minute break, okay? And then we'll get back to this. So 9:18, we'll come back to this. You may. All right, so the big thing here that we have to get is that what distinguishes a multicellular organism, a true multicellular organism, from a colony of cooperating cells is a division of labor. Okay, and that division of labor we call specialization. Okay, so that means that some cells in that organism are really good at doing this job. Okay, but they maybe depend on other cells that are really good at doing another job. Right? So what that means is that maybe it even gets to the point where some cells in your body don't do certain jobs. I mean, a cell still has to carry out the basic functions of an organism, okay? But maybe it just really doesn't do this job very well at all because it's not a jack of all trades and a master of none. It's a master of one and maybe not very good at some other ones. Okay? It's more like that kind of a thing. Would this organism here be a true multicellular organism or a colony of cells? Do those 5 cells all look the same? That is a colony of cooperating cells. If all of the cells look the same, they're not specialized. They're all identical, which means they all do all the jobs. The only advantage they have is that they can kind of depend on each other, right? There's maybe a size advantage or something like that, right? But there's not one that does this job and one that does another job. All of them have to feed. All of them have to get rid of waste. All of them have to make hormones or whatever else they have to do, okay? But they all have to do all of it. So this is a colonial organism, not a multicellular organism. It's a colony of cooperating cells. Okay? Everyone all right with that? Okay. Okay, so as organisms evolved, there was increasing specialization, okay, and increasing division of labor. So initially you had these colonial aggregates. All cells may have been mobile or motile with flagella. Okay, all cells in the colony tended to become increasingly interdependent. Some of the cells may have lost their flagella and become more proficient at doing other things. Okay, so it was a slow process. Okay, over the course of evolution. But as cells became, or as organisms became truly multicellular, some of their cells did certain jobs and some of them did others. So if we look at like an embryo as it develops, okay, for the first little while, all the cells are identical. Okay? They're just dividing and dividing, get a ball of cells. Okay? And then there's a point where specialization starts in that embryo. Okay? Some of the cells on the inside become what would be your nervous system. Other ones become what would become your digestive tract. Others become your skeleton. Others become your muscles. Okay? Your circulatory system. All of that kind of stuff. They eventually start to specialize. Okay? Now, at that point, if you lose some of those cells as that embryo, what's going to happen? So you've got like 3 cells that are destined to become your nervous system, and 2 of them die. What's going to happen? They're going to die. That embryo won't make it. It needs all of those cells. Their role, their fate is predetermined. Okay? So we have to have that specialization. That's why, okay, the Catholic Church doesn't like embryonic stem cell research. Okay? The Church has no problem with pluripotent stem cell research, which means they take the cells from your body as a grown person. Okay? But they do have a problem with taking them from an embryo. Because if you take them from an embryo, the embryo will die. Okay? And the Church doesn't see a difference between life at that stage and a fully grown person. They're both a life. Okay? And you're taking one of them. Okay? In one form, but not in the other. Right? There's actually a surgery that I was looking at getting to help my knees, where they would actually do like a liposuction. So it's like win-win, because they'll do a little bit of liposuction, take some of my fat, okay, and then they'll centrifuge it, and they'll pull from it stem cells, which they'll then inject into my knee in order to help me regrow cartilage. Okay? Because over the course of my life, I've destroyed all the cartilage in my knees. Okay? And then these stem cells will become cartilage cells, because they'll be around other cartilage cells, whatever few I have left, okay, and which will tell them you need to be like us, and they'll grow into these other cells. Now, pluripotent stem cells don't do that as well as embryonic cells. Okay? If they were to take embryonic stem cells, okay, and that were destined to become connective tissue and inject them into my knees, I'd be like the $6 million man, okay, because I would grow like brand new, super healthy cartilage from that. Okay? They're better, but it's, can I live with the ethical dilemma of a life had to be ended in order for my knees to be better? Okay? That's the ethical problem that the Catholic Church has with that kind of stem cell research. Okay? But it's that specialization. These cells are going to be this because they're specialized to do that. These cells are going to be this because they're specialized to do it. Okay. Now, looking at these pictures here, what do you notice in the picture in the top right and the picture in the lower left? What looks out of place or different?
The moon is really big in the bottom left.
Yeah, it's also really big in the top right. Okay? I mean, just on a matter of scale, the moon's huge in both of those pictures. Why is the moon so big in these pictures that represent the Earth, let's say 250 million years ago, or not, sorry, 2.5 billion years ago, okay, versus now? Why is the moon so much bigger? Did the moon shrink? Moon didn't shrink. Moon's slowly moving away. Okay? 2 centimeters every year. I kid you not, the moon is actually moving away 2 centimeters every year. It gets further away from the Earth. Okay? Now, it doesn't seem like very much, but when you put that over 2.5 or actually 4.6 billion years, it can move a long way. Okay? Because, again, the moon was formed by this big impact that threw all this debris out into orbit, and then it coalesced and formed the moon. Okay? So imagine 2.5 billion years ago, the moon is now way closer to the Earth. So, the Earth's rotational speed is faster. So a day is only like 18 hours or 15 hours. And the moon orbits the Earth much more rapidly as well. Okay? So instead of taking 28 days to go all the way around the Earth one time, it's going around the Earth once every couple of days. Okay? What effect does that have? What does the Earth do now? What effect does it have on the Earth now?
It moves like tides.
Yeah, it affects the tides. Now, that's at a huge distance, okay? Anyone ever been to the Bay of Fundy? Okay, out on the East Coast and seen the tides change? That's where they can change like huge and go up. The ocean will go up like 2 kilometers and then it'll come back, okay? That's caused by the moon's gravitational pull, pulling on the ocean. Well now, put the moon way closer to the Earth and going around the Earth more often, and the Earth's spinning faster. It would be like you took a bathtub and were shaking it violently back and forth when it's full of water. Okay? The ocean is just sloshing back and forth like crazy several times a day. Okay? Well, that's constantly bringing nutrients into all these places where life can evolve. Okay? It's constantly stirring things up, okay? And making the conditions good, okay, for life to evolve. Okay? So it would have been a very different place, okay, back then. All right, so we're going to talk about these different kinds of cells, but we're going to look at them mostly in terms of a plant. Okay? So parenchyma cells, and I'm never going to ask you for this name, okay, are an example of like stem cells. And I don't mean cells in the stem of a plant, I mean the stem cells we were just talking about. Okay? They can become anything. Right? So the plant has these in it, usually in like the buds and things like that that grow into something new. So they can become leaf tissue, stem tissue, or flower, okay? Things like that. They're not specialized until they receive a chemical signal that tells them you've got to become this. Okay? And at that point, they will be specialized. Okay? All right, we got water conducting cells. They look a lot different. They're tapered at the ends, because that way they fit tightly together and they can hold water in the tubes. Okay, those would be in the xylem. Again, it's not an example I'm going to ask you about. I'm just saying these cells look different. Okay, see how they're kind of tapered at the ends here. Okay, so they fit tightly together. Okay. Food conducting cells are different shaped. They're a little more hollow. Okay, and they've got these sieve plates, they've got little things here so that the sugary sap, when it's coming down, gets broken up so that crystals don't form in it. Okay? Otherwise it would become like honey. If you leave it out too long, it starts to crystallize. Okay? That kind of stuff, right? Now, this is the part we need to look at. The leaf is going to be our example of specialization in a multicellular organism. So you're going to see various diagrams of the leaf over and over and over again in this unit, okay? Because the leaf is our example of specialization in a multicellular organism. So we're going to look at the different cells in the leaf, okay? This week, on Wednesday, you're going to look at a slide that looks just like this, okay? This picture here on the right, okay? So this is a cross-section of a leaf. So what they've done in a cross-section of a leaf, okay, so they've taken a leaf and they've simply cut it and they're looking at it from that angle. So like split it in half and they're looking at it from that side so they can see all the different layers of the leaf. So that's that under a microscope. Okay. Do the cells all look the same? Right? There's distinctly different looking cells in that leaf. Okay? There's these cells on the top that are kind of just ovoid and they don't really look like they have much in them. They're pretty clear. Okay? And then there's all these like rectangular or columnar cells, like we would picture a plant cell. And then underneath that, there's a bunch of kind of irregularly shaped cells that also are like a little darker green. And then on the bottom, there's more of these ovoid kind of cells on the bottom. Okay? They all do a different job, and that's why they all look different. They're all specialized to do something a bit different. Okay, so this is something that we'll need to know, so you'll want to make some notes on this. Okay? The first cells that we're going to talk about are the cells of the epidermis. Okay? There's an upper epidermis and a lower epidermis. Okay? Epidermis means outer covering. Okay? So it's like this plant's skin, basically. The epidermal cells, as you can see in that diagram, they don't have like basically chloroplasts or anything that would help them carry out photosynthesis, because we don't want to block the light with the epidermal cells. Okay? Cells underneath are the ones that do the photosynthesis. The epidermal cells have one job. Okay? They're not photosynthetic. Okay? So that's not their job. Their job is to secrete a waxy cuticle. right? What I mean by a waxy cuticle is this layer, literally, of wax that seals the surface of the leaf so that it doesn't dry out. It's kind of like when you put like lip balm on, okay? Like you've ever used like chapstick, okay? That's waxy, okay, the chapstick, and it seals your lips so that moisture doesn't get out, and that can help to, you know, unchap your lips. Okay? Well, leaves are covered with that. That's why when like water drops on a leaf, it beads and runs off. The leaves don't absorb any water. Okay? That's the root's job. They're specialized to do that, not the leaves. Okay? So there's actually a waxy cuticle that's secreted by this epidermis that seals in the leaf and keeps the moisture there. Okay? So upper epidermis secretes the waxy cuticle. That's what it's specialized to do. Underneath that upper epidermis are all these columnar or rectangular looking plant cells. That we call the palisade layer. That is the photosynthetic part of the leaf. Those are the primarily photosynthetic cells. Okay? They're specialized to do one thing, carry out photosynthesis. Okay? And that's why they have the shape they have. They can be packed in really, really tight so that we can maximize the amount of space available for photosynthesis. Okay, so palisade layer, specialized for photosynthesis. Underneath the palisade layer is what we call the spongy layer, because you can see the cells go from being very rectangular to basically random, right, underneath here. So you can see these are all rectangular here, but these ones down here don't really have any specific shape. And there's actually gaps in between them. They don't fit tightly together. So there's holes in them, like a sponge. That's why they're called the spongy layer. Okay? And in between the cells is where water and oxygen and carbon dioxide can sit. Okay? So basically, this is the layer that allows the exchange of gases that is necessary for photosynthesis. Okay? The carbon dioxide can go to the palisade cells while they capture light and carry out photosynthesis, and then the oxygen will come back into this layer and be released out of the leaf. Okay? When the oxygen is released, okay, that's kind of the end of photosynthesis, but also water has to evaporate for that to happen. Okay? So the water is also in that layer. Okay? It's necessary for photosynthesis as well. Okay. Within the leaf as well, within that spongy layer, you're going to find the cells that are specialized for carrying water and sugar. Okay? And you're going to find that in a vein. Okay? And in a vein, it'll be a xylem and a phloem, but we'll talk about that another day. In the lower epidermis, like we said, the lower epidermis and the upper epidermis are very, very similar. They effectively do the same job. But in the lower epidermis, there are also things called stomates. Okay? Stomates are like pores. They can open and close. When they're open, photosynthesis can occur because water will evaporate and oxygen and carbon dioxide will be exchanged. That can't happen through the cuticle. The cuticle, that waxy part, okay, seals the leaf up and nothing gets through it. Oxygen doesn't get through it, carbon dioxide doesn't get through it, water doesn't get through it. Okay? But in the lower epidermis, so on the bottom of the leaf only, okay, you would see these little structures, these little stomates. Why is it smart for the plant to put them on the bottom of the leaf and not the top? So light can get at the top, but also light hits the top. What would happen more if you had the stomates where water evaporates on the top? Not so much less light. More water would evaporate. It's always shady on the underside of the leaf, right? So it loses less water by having these stomates where water evaporates out of, being on the bottom of the leaf. okay? They're always in the shade. Now, they open and close, but it's not a conscious thing, okay? They're made up of two guard cells, which we're gonna talk about on the next slide here. Okay, so one stomate is made of two guard cells and they can open and close, which allows the plant to have some sort of control, and that's in like air quotes, okay, control over how much water evaporates. And thus how much photosynthesis is done. All right, so you're gonna need to know the waxy cuticle. You're gonna need to know the epidermis, palisade and spongy layers, veins, stomates, and guard cells. Okay, so we've talked about what all of these do. We're gonna talk about what guard cells do in a minute, because all of these cells are plant cells, but they're all specialized to do a certain job. Okay, and that's the point here, is that the leaf is a great example of specialization in a multicellular organism. All these cells are different. All these cells do different jobs. Okay. Okay, so here's our guard cells and stomates. Okay, so we've got, this is what the stomate looks like. Okay, these two red things on either side are the guard cells that make up the stomate. So here's how the stomate works. These cells are specialized in that their shape can change based on how much water is in their vacuoles. Because remember, plant cells have vacuoles, right? So as water evaporates through the stomates, when the water leaves, minerals, salts, get left behind. Okay? If salts get left behind, what cell transport process is going to try to balance those salts? Osmosis. Right? So as the salts get left behind, osmosis tries to bring water up the plant. That's how it actually gets transported, is by osmosis. Okay? Up the plant to these areas. Right? But as that salt gets left behind, what very quickly happens is water gets drawn out of the guard cells. And when their vacuoles get basically dried out, they lose this shape and they go to this shape. It's the vacuoles being full that can hold the guard cells in that shape and the stomate open. As water evaporates, the stomates naturally close because an osmotic imbalance occurs. Okay? So throughout the day, the stomates naturally close. And then overnight, when there's no sun, the plant can kind of make up for that loss, bring water up from the roots, and the stomates will be open in the morning again. Does that sort of make sense? Okay? It's not something that plant can control, right? The plant doesn't go, hey, everybody close the stomates, it's getting hot and dry out there. Okay? It doesn't. It's just a matter of the water evaporates and creates an osmotic pressure that will automatically close them. Okay? So they close as the plant becomes stressed. Okay? But they're specialized in that they can do that. Do they carry out a ton of photosynthesis? No. Okay? Maybe a little bit, but that's not their primary purpose. Their primary purpose is to have this shape and be able to change that shape due to osmotic pressure. Okay? So again, another example of a cell that's specialized to do a certain job. It's specialized to regulate the loss of water and the rate of photosynthesis. All right, so definitely be able to explain that process in detail, because the level of detail is important. Okay, questions there? I would like you guys to write down some answers for those questions, and we'll go through them here in a few minutes. So, why do you suppose multicellularity would be so superior to being unicellular? Has something to do with the activity we did on Friday. If you're multicellular, what can you become that a single-celled organism can?
It's more efficient.
It is more efficient, generally.
You can become specialized.
You You can become specialized, which is what makes you more efficient. You can be bigger. Yeah, okay, specialized, efficient, and bigger. All right, and generally, bigger is better. You can eat more things and fewer things can eat you, or you can get more sunshine than a single-celled organism can, right? It's simply an advantage to generally be bigger. Question number 2, how are the cells of a leaf different from cells found in the stem of a plant? Okay, generally, what's the job of the leaf? Carry out photosynthesis. What's the job of the stem? Yeah, it carries nutrients to the leaf and supports like the plant, right? It keeps the plant upright where it can get lots of sun. Are those two very different jobs? That's why they're different. They have different jobs. They're specialized to do different things. Okay? The cells in the leaf are generally specialized to support all things photosynthesis, where the cells in the leaf are generally specialized to support things. Support the leaf. Okay? That's what they do. Okay. The epidermis and stomates have similar jobs. They do. They do them differently, but they both try to conserve what? Water. The epidermis secretes that waxy cuticle that seals up the leaf. Okay? And the stomates open and close in response to the amount of water that's been lost. So they both control the amount of water that's been lost, but they do it differently. Okay? But they both have a role to play in it. Okay? That cuticle is crucially important. Okay? Plants that don't have a waxy cuticle are very, very susceptible to dehydration, like a moss. Okay? A moss does not have a waxy cuticle. If you put a moss in the sun, it just dries up and gets crunchy, like quickly. Whereas you can leave a plant like that one out in the sun for days and it won't dry up and get crunchy because it's going to limit the amount of water that evaporates. Okay? Whereas something without a waxy cuticle can't. All right, and describe how the stomate works. What's a key word that needs to be in your description? Starts with O. Osmosis, definitely. Okay, so here's an example of level of detail. 1 out of 5 marks for this question. Opens and closes to control water. That's a 1 out of 5. Okay? Versus, as the plant loses water, this will close up to control it. That might be 2 out of 5. Okay? 3 out of 5 might be something like the stomates can change shape, and or the guard cells can change shape, and that can open and close the stomate and help control the loss of water. That might be a 3 out of 5. Okay? 4 out of 5. As the plant loses water, salts get left behind, and the salts cause the guard cells to change shape and close and control water. And 5 out of 5 would add the word osmosis. Osmosis is the passive movement of water to balance salt. That's what causes the guard cells to change shape and open and close. Okay, you guys following the difference there? Level of detail is super important in biology. Okay, couple of reminders. Your cell size activity from Friday, that's due on Wednesday. So make sure you have it done for then. Okay, if you want me to look it over, you can pop in at nighttime today, okay, or I won't be available at lunch today. But yeah, come in at nighttime and I can have a look at it then, okay, or after school for a little bit or something like that. Happy to look those over. Know, guys, that in terms of like rewrites on things, that I generally say no to that. Okay, so I'm only bringing it up because over the last few days in my physics class as well as this class, I've had people asking, Mr. Gooder, if I fix this, will you mark it again? And generally, the answer to that is no, because if I say yes, I do twice as much marking, and that's not really fair, given that I give pretty explicit instructions and make my expectations pretty clear. So just know that generally I don't do that unless there's really extenuating circumstances. Okay? I am understanding, and if there was some extenuating circumstance, I would consider it. Okay? But in general, no. Okay. All right. So you got 2 minutes left here. You got a cell side activity you can work on. Or, what's tomorrow's quiz gonna be on? Parts of the cell, yeah. So I'll post a quiz or a picture of the cell tonight, okay? And you'll have to label it and give me the function of all the structures, okay? But that might be something you study for the next 90 seconds. Okay, just have a look over your cell diagram, start thinking about what everything looks like, because that's definitely what your quiz will be on tomorrow.